We don't know her real name. We never will. The language she spoke, the songs she sang, the stories her people passed down for thousands of years, all of it died with her. History gave her a name that wasn't hers, buried her among strangers, and moved on. But for 18 years on a forgotten island, she refused to disappear. This is her story. Picture her standing on the shore. The year is 1835. The ship is gone. Not anchored around the headland, not delayed by weather. Gone. The last trace of its sail has dissolved into the gray horizon, and she is standing on the beach of San Nicolas Island, watching the place where it used to be, waiting for a certainty she already has. The wind moves around her, the ocean continues its indifferent work, and the understanding settles into her chest like a stone dropping through still water. She has been left behind. She doesn't know yet how completely. She doesn't know that the people on that ship, her people, the last surviving members of the Nicoleno tribe, will reach the mainland and begin dying almost immediately. Disease, displacement, the quiet collapse that happens when you remove people from the only world they have ever known. She doesn't know that in a few years, every single one of them will be gone. She doesn't know that the language she speaks, the songs she carries in memory, the names her people gave to things across thousands of years of living, she doesn't know yet that all of it now exists only in her. She just knows the ship is gone. The island that surrounds her is not gentle. San Nicolas sits 61 miles off the California coast, far enough that the mainland is invisible, far enough that you could stand on its highest point and see nothing in any direction but water and gray sky and the particular emptiness of open ocean. The wind never stops here. It comes from every direction, salt-heavy and cold, sculpting every tree and shrub low to the ground, pulling warmth from exposed skin before you even register the chill. Fog rolls in for days at a time and turns the world featureless. Fresh water is almost impossible to find. The cliffs drop straight into restless sea. But she knows this island. She has known it her entire life. The Nicoleno people had lived here for thousands of years, and not easily, expertly. They had learned to read the island's tides and seasons the way you learn a familiar face, until the knowledge stops feeling like knowledge and starts feeling like instinct. Which rocks held abalone at low tide, which months the seals hauled out onto the beaches, which direction the worst storms came from, and how much warning the sky gave before they arrived. All of it lived in her, not as information she had to recall, but as reflex, as the particular intelligence of a body that has grown up in a specific place and absorbed its rhythms completely. What had brought her to this moment was not an accident. It was the end of a long destruction. Russian fur traders had arrived on the California coast in the early 1800s, hunting sea otters whose pelts were worth fortunes in international markets. They came with hunters, with guns, and with diseases the Nicoleno had never encountered and had no immunity to fight. Smallpox moved through the island's population in waves. Measles followed. The community that had sustained itself for thousands of years was devastated within a few decades. By the 1830s, the Nicoleno numbered only in the dozens, weakened, displaced, and entirely invisible to the colonial powers now making decisions about their lives. In 1835, the Spanish Franciscan missionaries decided to relocate the survivors to the mainland. they sent one schooner. The removal was chaos. A storm was building. The ship couldn't anchor properly. People scrambled aboard with whatever they could carry, shouting in languages that didn't overlap, moving with the specific panic of people being displaced by forces they can't resist. And then, in the noise and the rushing and the darkening sky, she didn't make it aboard. Whether she was overlooked in the chaos, whether she jumped back to shore searching for a child she couldn't find, whether someone knew and made the calculation that turning back in worsening weather was too costly, no account agrees. The truth of that specific moment is gone. What remains is the outcome. The ship left. She was on the island. The sound of the water closed back around her, and the wind resumed its work, and she was alone. Except, and this detail carries its own particular weight, she may have been not entirely alone, not at first. Some accounts suggest a young child was with her, a son, a small human presence that gave her something beyond herself to move toward. But those same accounts suggest the child died not long after, drowned most likely, attempting to paddle a small canoe through rough water toward the mainland, toward help, toward a ship that was already gone. If that is true, then at some point she understood what the missing canoe meant. And after that, there was no one, no voice, no face, no hand. The silence became total, the kind of silence that has physical weight, that you have to learn to breathe inside of. She turned away from the horizon. She had shelter to build before dark, and the wind was picking up, and no one was coming. Not today. As it turned out, not for 18 years.
Here is what people imagine when they hear the phrase survival story. They imagine urgency, dramatic decisions made in the last possible second. A person running out of time, driven by adrenaline, sustained by the burning certainty that rescue is coming if they can just hold on long enough. That is not what this was. What this was quieter and harder, and in many ways more extraordinary than any dramatic survival tale has ever managed to capture. What this was 18 years of ordinary days, 18 years of waking up alone, working alone, eating alone, and going to sleep alone, and then doing it all over again the next morning. 18 years of solving every problem with no one to help solve it. 18 years of a life built entirely by one pair of hands. The tools she made were not desperate improvisations. They were precise, careful, refined over time through repetition and observation, and the particular patience of someone who has no margin for carelessness. She built shelters from whatever the island offered, driftwood, grasses, and the enormous bones of a whale that had beached on the shore years before her time. The whalebone structure was large enough to live in, engineered deliberately to withstand the island's winds, positioned with attention to exposure and warmth. She built smaller, lighter shelters for different seasons, moving between them as the year turned, reading the island's rhythms as fluently as she ever had. She made clothing from bird feathers and seal skins, stitching them together using needles carved from bone, needles that could snap without warning and had to be replaced from scratch. The work was slow and exacting and never truly finished because everything wore out and had to be remade. Skins stretched and cracked, stitching loosened in the wind. The island was constantly taking back what she built, and she was constantly rebuilding. This was not misery, it was simply the terms of the arrangement. Food came from the sea, shellfish from tidal rocks, fish caught with tools she fashioned herself, seabirds when the opportunity arose, seals hunted during the months they gathered on the beaches. She dried meat against the lean seasons. She timed her gathering to tides she had memorized, to patterns she had spent years observing and refining until they were second nature. Water, always the scarcest resource, she collected from rainfall in natural rock basins or stored in containers she made herself, rationing with the precision of someone who understood exactly what running out meant. Archaeological evidence recovered from the island decades later confirmed what the logic of her survival already suggested, that she was not struggling, she was functioning. The objects she left behind showed craft, intelligence, and a steadiness of mind that extended far beyond the immediate demands of keeping herself fed and sheltered. Because the physical demands, as extreme as they were, may not have been what came closest to breaking her. Researchers who have studied prolonged isolation describe what happens to the human mind when it is denied the basic nourishment of other people. Without the feedback of social interaction, without the mirror that other humans hold up for us, identity becomes unstable. The sense of self, of being a specific, continuous person moving through time, begins to erode. People in extreme solitude report hallucinations. They report conversations with presences that aren't there. They report losing track of the boundary between memory and the present moment, between who they were and who they are becoming. She found ways to fight this. Evidence suggests she sang, regularly, deliberately, persistently. Songs from her culture, carried in memory and sung into the wind with no audience and no purpose except to keep them alive and to hear her own voice naming things in her own language. She spoke aloud, possibly to animals, possibly to the spirits her people believed in, possibly simply to exercise the human need to put sound into silence and hear it come back changed. She carved marks into sticks to track the passage of days, small insistences that time was real and that she was living inside it, not simply drifting through it. These were not symptoms of instability. They were the opposite. They were deliberate strategies, chosen and maintained for preserving the thing that no amount of physical skill could preserve on its own, her sense of herself as a person, as someone specific, as the last living member of a people whose entire existence now depended on her continuing to exist. She didn't know that last part, but she acted as if she did. The years moved, a decade passed, then most of another. The seasons repeated their cycle, and she repeated hers. The island gave what it gave, and withheld what it withheld, and she adapted, continuously, without complaint, because there was no one to complain to, and complaining had never kept anyone alive anyway. On the mainland, the Nicoleno people who had been relocated in 1835 were already gone, dead of disease and displacement within a few years of their arrival. The woman still alive on San Nicolas Island had become, without knowing it, the last living archive of their language, their songs, their way of understanding the world. Everything her people had known and made and passed down across thousands of years of continuous life, it lived now only in her memory, in the marks she carved, in the songs she sang to an empty island and a sky that didn't answer back. No ship came, no rescue party was organized, no one on the mainland remembered she was there, because the people who would have remembered her were dead, and the people who remained had never known she existed.
until, in 1853, a rumor reached a sea otter hunter named Captain George Nidever. Vague, persistent, slightly incredible. People claimed there were signs of habitation on San Nicolas Island, shelters, tools, evidence of a life being actively lived. He decided, after years of dismissing the story, to go and look. When Nidever's men landed on San Nicolas Island, they found evidence immediately. Shelters, carefully constructed and recently used. Tools made with evident skill. Food remains, the unmistakable signs of a person living here, living deliberately, living with a competence that surprised everyone who examined what had been left behind. Whoever had made these things was not barely surviving, they were maintaining a life. But the island was empty, or appeared to be. The men spread out and searched. They called out. They moved through the terrain methodically, covering ground, finding more evidence, always fresh, always recently touched, and never finding its maker. Someone was here. Someone was watching them. Someone was choosing, with great care, not to be seen. Think about what that moment felt like from her side. 18 years. 18 years of a world that contained only herself. 18 years without a human face, a human voice, a human presence of any kind. And now, suddenly, there are men on her island, loud and foreign, and moving through the spaces she has spent 18 years making her own. They speak a language that means nothing to her. They carry objects she has never seen. They represent the world that put her on this island and never came back, a world she has no reason to trust and every reason to regard with the careful distance of someone who has learned at great cost that the only reliable thing is her own judgment. Would you walk toward them? After all of that, would you? She watched. She assessed. She made a decision that no one could make for her, in the privacy of her own mind, about people she didn't know and a future she couldn't predict. And she took her time making it, because she had always taken her time, because rushing was how you made mistakes, and mistakes on this island had always been expensive. On the final night, the last night before Nidever's men planned to abandon the search and leave, she appeared. She walked out of the darkness and into the firelight. She was carrying roasted wild onions, an offering, the simplest possible gesture and also the most complete one. She had watched these strangers long enough to decide they were not dangerous. She had prepared food. She was bringing it to them. Without a single shared word, without any language in common, she was communicating something that needed no translation at all. I am here. I have decided to trust you. Here is food. The meeting that followed was quiet and strange and deeply moving by every account that survives it. No one spoke her language. She spoke none of theirs. Everything passed between them through gesture and expression and the particular patience of people trying very hard to reach each other across an enormous distance. One crew member later recalled that she sang for them, a song none of them could understand, in a language none of them had ever heard, belonging to a people none of them knew existed. It was translated loosely, imperfectly, as something like contentment, something like readiness, something that might in another language have been called peace. She chose to go with them. After 18 years, she chose to leave the island. She stepped onto the boat. The island fell away behind her. The shelters, the tools, the whalebone structure she had built and rebuilt, the marks carved into sticks, the songs she had sung into the wind for 18 years, all of it remained, silent and salt-weathered, as the water widened between her and the shore. She was going back to a world that had changed beyond recognition while she was gone. She didn't know that yet. What she knew was that she had decided, and that the decision was hers, and that after 18 years of making every decision entirely alone, this one felt no different. She sat in the boat and watched the island disappear, and whatever she felt in that moment, relief, grief, fear, something that had no name in any language anyone around her could speak, she kept it, as she had always kept everything, quietly to herself. Santa Barbara in 1853 was loud, dense, full of horses and buildings and crowds of people speaking languages she didn't know, wearing clothes unlike anything she had seen in 18 years, moving with the particular purposeful urgency of people who have never had to be entirely self-sufficient and don't realize how much of their ease depends on other people absorbing the difficulty for them. After 18 years of silence and wind and the slow rhythms of an island that operated entirely on its own terms, this must have been staggering. And yet, by every account, she met it with composure. She examined everything with curiosity, touching objects carefully, watching how people used them, learning through the patient observation that had kept her alive for nearly 2 decades. Horses astonished her. Architecture fascinated her. She moved through Santa Barbara the way she had always moved through the island, attentively, without rushing, gathering information with both hands. People who met her described a quality of steadiness that they found difficult to explain. She was not performing calm, she simply was calm, the calm of someone who had spent 18 years entirely dependent on her own judgment and had long since made peace with that fact. People came to see her constantly. Word spread fast. The woman from San Nicolas Island became an immediate object of fascination, a living remnant of something the modern world had consumed so completely that most people had forgotten it had ever existed. Missionaries came, scholars came, ordinary people came out of simple curiosity, drawn by a story that even then felt like it belonged to another time. They brought her food, they brought her gifts. They watched her with a mixture of wonder and pity that she, mercifully, lacked the language to fully interpret. And every single one of them tried to speak to her. Linguists attempted every native California language they knew. Missionaries brought native people from dozens of different tribes, hoping for even a fragment of overlap, a single shared word, some narrow bridge between her language and anything still spoken in the world. Nothing worked. The Nicoleno language was gone from the earth except in her, and she was surrounded by people who had no key to it. She could not tell them her name. She could not tell them what the 18 years had been like. She could not tell them about the child she may have lost, or about the whalebone house, or about the songs she had sung to keep herself whole when the silence pressed too hard. Everything she had lived through was locked inside a language that now existed nowhere else. She was the last speaker of a dead language, surrounded by people desperate to hear it, and the gap between them was absolute and unbreachable. And then her body began to fail. For 18 years she had eaten a specific narrow diet,
almost entirely protein, drawn from the sea, precisely calibrated to what the island offered and what her system had adapted to process. It had sustained her through conditions that should have killed her. What it had not done was prepare her for abundance, for variety, for the generosity of people pressing unfamiliar foods upon her out of warmth and welcome. Her digestive system had no experience with most of what she was given. Her immune system had never encountered the ordinary pathogens circulating through a human community. The same adaptation that had kept her alive in isolation now made her catastrophically vulnerable to everything civilization offered. She became ill quickly, dysentery most likely. Within weeks of her arrival in Santa Barbara, the woman who had survived 18 years alone on one of the most inhospitable islands off the California coast was dying from the consequences of being welcomed. 7 weeks after her rescue, she died.
Not from the island, from the food people gave her out of kindness. Her immune system, built for isolation, had no defense against civilization's ordinary abundance. Before she died, a Franciscan priest baptized her and gave her a Spanish name, Juana Maria, the only name history ever recorded. She was buried in an unmarked grave at the Santa Barbara Mission Cemetery, among strangers, in soil nothing like the island that had shaped her. Her possessions were lost. Her language died with her. Her real name was never known. But she lived. For 18 years, entirely alone, on a forgotten island at the edge of the Pacific, she lived. With no audience, no witness, no promise that anyone would ever know. She refused to disappear when the world stopped looking. And that refusal, made quietly, made alone, made every single morning for 18 years, is one of the most extraordinary things a human being has ever done. If this story stayed with you, subscribe, leave a like, and stay with us, because there are more stories like this one, and they deserve to be told.